Hello there, and welcome to What's Your Story. I have a very interesting guest for you today. His name is Mr. Fred Peters, and we're going to let you find out all about him right now. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I'm just so excited that you're here because you've done things that most of us only dream about. So let's just start at the beginning. You graduated college around 1957, right?
Right.
And what happened from there?
When I graduated, my desire always since I was a teenager was to work on rockets. So I went to work for Convair Astronautics in San Diego, who was building the Atlas ICBM, the most powerful rocket in the world at that time. While I was there, I was a weights engineer. I handled weight control and that kind of thing.
Now weight is very, very important to rocket ships, right?
Right. In any aerospace program, weight is critical.
So how do you get to be a weight engineer?
Just what fell into, they needed people in that category, and that was an interesting category. So that's where I ended up with an expertise. Because of that expertise, after 3 years at Convair, they pulled me into what they called pre-design. That was their advanced design group that answered all the proposals that came in from the government.
Mm.
One of those proposals in 1960 was to do a feasibility study for landing on the moon for a project called Apollo.
Oh, wow.
So in December 1960, I went to work with the group that put together the feasibility study for Convair's proposal, and as doing the weight control, all the weight work on it. And it was kind of interesting. We looked at a lot of different things, including a spacecraft that looked like a flying saucer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never was kind of impractical. It's hard to squeeze things into it. But anyway, and we bid on the feasibility study, or did it for NASA. And out of all the proposals, there were 5 that were considered exceptional, and NASA picked those to bid on a contract, to get a contract to build the Apollo spacecraft. That was done. It was won by North American Aviation in Downey, California, not our company. So once you're bitten by the space bug, you can't give it up. So I went to work for North American once again as a weights engineer, and I guess that must have been August 1961, something like that, and 1961, early 62. And I did weights work for them till about the fall of 1962. Most of my colleagues that I worked with at Convair that worked on the feasibility study went to NASA, either Langley or in Houston. At that time, Houston was just building up. Well, they wanted me to come to Houston to join NASA. And at the time, I was going with a very lovely girl I ended up marrying, so I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
But through enough adult beverage and a few steaks, they ended up talking me into going.
Steaks and adult beverage can convince you of a lot of things.
Yeah, it convinces you of a lot of things, you know. So I ended up going to Houston in 1962 at the NASA Apollo Spacecraft Program Office. That was the organization that managed the Apollo spacecraft, the whole program, spacecraft program, not the booster, just the spacecraft. And started there as a weights engineer, and that was the idea of trying to put all the equipment into the reentry vehicle so it could come in the right way and had the right balance. And but that only lasted for a little while. After that, they needed somebody to become a project engineer, and a project engineer the way they did it early. And you got to keep in mind, 62. NASA's only 4 years old. It's a brand new agency,
right.
And all kinds of good things happen in new agencies that would never happen in a mature one. So they assign people to a specific spacecraft to oversee for the government its construction, testing, and final acceptance by the government to ship it to wherever it's going to be used. And so I ended up as a project engineer, and went through the next 5 years, well, I guess till 1972 when the program was canceled, and ended up project engineering 5 different spacecraft. So it was a interesting time.
Now what does a project engineer do?
Well, the way we did it, the program office assigned somebody to the spacecraft that was being built, and you oversaw its activity for the government. If there was a problem with it and they needed a government signature to sign off on it that it was okay, or redo it, or accept the change, I had to sign for that. Mm-hmm. So it was a responsibility. It was kind of awesome, where you consider for what, 1962 or 63, 26 years old or something like
right,
that.
Yeah.
Pretty young. So it was, and that's how it worked all the time. So I had specific spacecraft, and after overseeing everything and signing for everything that was wrong, saying it was okay or wasn't okay, I would end up signing what they call the DD-250. That is the document that accepts it for the government and allows the contractor to get paid. So that's what a project engineer did. I don't think they ever created them again. It was just because of the fact that it was a new agency, mm-hmm. we were doing new things, we needed people, and we were spread pretty thin. So they gave responsibilities to people that you normally wouldn't do.
And yet, how exciting. Now, when you were actually doing the work, did it seem as exciting as it does to us, those of us out here sitting here, or did it just feel like, oh, I'm going to work today, I'm doing whatever? Did you realize that you were really making a part of history?
Well, yeah, you realize what you're doing if you could make it work. For
yes.
the 19th century, you're doing something that nobody in the world has ever done. Can you achieve it? That was the big thing.
Yes.
And yeah, so we were aware of the fact we were doing something different. The thing with Apollo, it was sold to President Kennedy when he made his big speech committing us to go to the moon.
Yes.
Under the agreement that we knew what we had to do. We didn't have it yet. We would have to build it and develop it, but it was not off the shelf. Everything was new, and nobody had ever gone into space at that time. We had about 5 minutes of space out when Kennedy committed us to go to the moon and do it by the end of the decade. That's what started the space race. They call it a space race for a long time, but it wasn't a race until there was a finish line.
Yes.
And Kennedy set the finish line.
Yes.
It was the end of the decade. So, yeah, we were aware of it all the time. It was grueling work. You had to be young to do it. I mean, it was 7 days a week, all around the clock, all the time. You were subject to calls at any time. I mean, I'd get calls 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because they had a problem that needed a NASA signature. I'd zip into the plant to take care of it. It's pretty grueling. So, but it was exciting. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, I have to think it had to be so exhilarating to be a part of that and to be making it happen. And the interesting thing about it too is, I think Kennedy said, didn't he say, we're going to send men onto the moon before the Russians in the next decade and bring them back alive? So, and bring them back alive part was pretty.
Well, that's what the astronauts always had trouble with. It used to bother them because we would say we were going to go to the moon and land. Nobody ever covered the fact they were going to get them back. So that always upset them. So it was always, but Kennedy committed us to go to the moon. It's an engineering problem to beat the Russians. He never used the Russians in the speech, but
he didn't.
It was obvious that that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
And he needed that very badly. To put him in perspective, it always bothered him on how much it would cost. It was estimated it cost $25 billion at that time. That's about what it ended up costing to do it all. And he was very nervous about all that money being spent. But Congress supported it all. They gave him money. They gave NASA. Money was not a problem to us for a long time until near the end of the program. Whatever we needed, we could get. We had government priorities. If you notice the spacesuits, the helmet has a gold face mask. That's real gold.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And what's the purpose of that?
It reflects very, very well. And gold is very malleable. You can put it on anything, and it doesn't take a lot. But we had a priority. We could just call Fort Knox and ask them for gold, and they shipped it to us.
Amazing.
Just like that. Yeah, we had what they called the DX priority for the government at the time. No, it was exciting. We could get anything we wanted, but it was pretty grueling. You know, it cost a lot of families. There's no doubt about it.
Oh, I'm sure.
The divorce rate for us at NASA was the highest in the country for anything. You know, guys would be gone all the time. You know, a woman's running the family, taking care of the kids, and after a while she says, enough.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of tough on families, no doubt about
Now,
it.
how many years did it take from the beginning of that project to actually get that first Apollo up to the moon, and then how much longer did this program go on?
We started the feasibility study in the fall of 1960.
Uh-huh.
That's the start of Apollo. Kennedy committed us in 1962. The first, we landed in 1968 in July, so that was about 8 years.
Yes.
And the program ended with Apollo 17 in 1972. So the program lasted about 12 years. They officially canceled it in 1973, but the last Apollo flight was 1972. So the whole program lasted about 12 years. That's all you did for 12 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was fun.
And now, did you actually meet with the various astronauts about what their needs would be during the time they were on rocket ships, or how did that
Well,
get
the way
played
we
out?
did it, if one of my spacecraft, and two of them were flight spacecraft, manned flight spacecraft, Apollo 7 was the first manned flight, and it occurred after we had an accident on the pad that killed 3 astronauts. So it was a very sensitive one. It took us about 18 months to redo the whole thing. That was the one where I was probably closest to the astronauts, because they were always at the plant. They were always inside trying it out. When we ran tests, they would be there to make sure everything was right. So those were the ones I was closest to. I've met a lot of them, but those were the ones. And to this day, I still communicate with one of them that still has his feet on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long time. And that one flew in October 1968. That was the first flight. We had an accident on the pad on Apollo 1 in January of 1967, and that delayed the program for 18 months till we built another one. But the whole program lasted about 12 years, about 8 years to get us to land and come back.
And come back, yeah.
I got to remember that.
Yeah, because I think that was something that a lot of people didn't mention, was
Yeah,
all
right.
like, wow, we're into space, but are those people back,
Yeah, they would say, oh boy, we landed on the moon. That was fine. But we landed on the moon and we came back. That was the catch.
Yes, that's a big catch.
Right.
You didn't have to stay there forever,
Right.
Do you think they're going to build hotels and things on the moon?
Oh no, well, probably won't happen for a long, long time. There's a lot of problems with moon. First of all, we don't know a lot about it. We only landed on a small strip of the moon, mostly around the equator, and found out an awful lot about it. But it's got about 2 inches of dust, like sand. But that sand is not like sand on Earth. It's like a diamond. It has
Really?
sharp edges. It can tear up a spacesuit. It's a problem. There's a lot of things that you need to learn before they can land on the moon. The biggest problem with space is radiation. That's the problem. And until you protect somebody from space radiation, you're not going anywhere, because it is very, very lethal. We were lucky when we had men on the moon. We never had a violent storm come out of the sun, or they'd have been in big trouble.
Nobody ever talked about the possibility of that, did they? Really?
Well, we knew it. We knew there was going to be intense radiation, and they monitored the sun all the time. But the best they could have done if they had a big solar flare that came straight at the moon would be get back in the lunar module or the command module, and it didn't give you a lot of protection. But even now, so when they go back to the moon, they're looking for a place where they can be protected, and that's probably going to be in one of the lunar caverns that they got there. It's a lot of. It's not that easy. It's a unforgiving environment. It's a very dangerous environment, and while it might sound easy and it's nice, it is risky. No doubt about it.
I'm sure.
Lots of people take the risk. There always are people who take the risk, but it is risky.
Yeah, I always wonder about these people who have extreme amount of money and they're willing to pay millions if they could just go, with the astronauts to the moon. And I think, what is wrong with your brain? You weren't trained, you weren't educated for this, and now you're thinking, oh, I'll just hop off there on a little trip.
Well, they can do that. They want to pay for it, but they're taking big risks. NASA would probably never do it. We've flown civilians up to the space station, but probably wouldn't do it. We had a big argument anyway with the astronauts that went to the moon anyway. The science community never liked the Apollo program. It took a lot of money away from basic science in other areas, and so they hated the program. Carl Sagan would go crazy over it. He always raised heck about it. And in order to even get the slightest bit of support from the science community, we had to promise them that we would fly a scientist. It always bothered them. These are test pilots, basically. That's what they do. They take those risks, and they know how to evaluate the area and what's going on. And that's what they did. So finally, on the last flight on Apollo 17, we had to make the science community happy. We meet our commitment, and Harrison Schmitt flew on the 7th one, and he was a geologist.
And so was his purpose to get out and to test the various sand and rocks and I started to say Earth, but it's not Earth on the moon, is it? It's
kind of
it's the floor of the moon or whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of, oddly enough, we knew so little about the moon when we started in 1962, or even when we started to design a lunar module to land on the moon, or even consider landing on the moon. We had to know what was its surface. We had no idea what it was. The expert at the time was a professor at Cornell, and he told us that when we landed on the moon, we would probably sink into 4 feet of dust.
Oh.
Okay, and so that was the best data we had. So when we designed the lunar module, if you look at it, it has huge foot pads.
Yes.
It's designed to land on something that is deep.
Yes.
And it turns out there's about an inch of dust.
Oh, so yeah.
But by the time we found out about all that, it was too late. It would have cost us millions of dollars just to redesign the landing pad, so we left them that way.
And so were all the others then the same?
Yeah, they're all the same.
Yeah. And yet, in different places where these landed on the moon, were the dust levels different?
No, not much. They're about the same. If you notice, when you watch the first lunar landing, Neil Armstrong's on the end of the ladder. He's standing on the footpad, and he doesn't jump right off. He just kind of touches it with his boot to see what it's really like.
Yeah.
And boot went down about an inch. That's when he got off. When Buzz Aldrin came down, he knew it already. He just jumped right off.
Yeah, because he already knew.
Yeah, he knew it was fine. It has a very hard crust, but it has this very thin layer of dust. But it's really, really touchy dust.
And then that hard crust, what's under that?
Oh, well, it's just a very deep, hard crust. I don't know, we had a lot of trouble drilling into it.
Did you?
Yeah, if you watch some of the early astronauts on the moon, they had this device where they had a heck of a time. It's really solid. So they've learned an awful lot about it. I don't recall. I think it's got it's got a core, but it's not magnetic like ours. It's an interesting place.
Yes, I mean the whole universe is an interesting place,
Oh, yeah.
And to think that who created this, it's like, yes, I'm very spiritual, so I believe that God created this whole universe. But scientists very often don't think that. They think someone else or something else or some explosion caused all these different planets and
well, you know, God could have created the explosion too.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got to look at it that way. No, that's just what you believe. There's still people don't believe we even landed on the moon.
Oh, I know. There's people that don't believe the Holocaust either. That's the most
Yeah, right.
ridiculous thing I ever heard of.
Yeah, right. So there's always somebody, but we did it. I didn't spend 12 years, 24 hours a day for nothing
Yeah, yeah.
to do it in a movie studio.
Do you believe there are other unidentified things flying around out there, or that they might have come from another planet?
Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of unidentified things kicking around. They're still looking at it. I don't know. Doesn't make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
You know.
The reason I asked that is because a few years ago I had a little silver Volkswagen, and I was driving back from somewhere, and I was coming past where the test site was, and then past Nellis and into town, and something, I don't know what it was, something round and silver and big, flew up over my Volkswagen, shined all kinds of lights down on my Volkswagen, and hovered there, and then zip, took off, and I could see it flying quickly around the city of Las Vegas and on off, and I never figured out what it was.
Well, there's a lot of incidents like that. They've been investigating them for years. I don't know if they ever came up with anything. I don't know why anybody want to bother with us anyway.
Well, probably curious, just like we are about other places.
Well, yeah, they're so curious they never landed to find out anymore. So there is something going on.
I was really fascinated with that night. I thought, wow, this is something like right out of the movies. Or
Well, lots of people have seen strange phenomenon. I've never seen one, but you know, lots of people have seen them, and they investigate all of them. And I don't know that anybody's ever come up with any conclusion about it one way or another.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's kind of interesting. But for Apollo, it was an interesting program. You know, it was a program that what always bothered me was after it was over, we kind of wiped our brow and said, boy, I'm glad that's over. You know, let's do something else. And that something else was never to go out into space to explore. That's why NASA was created in the first place. So then we built a space station and we built a shuttle, and now 50 years later they decided to go back.
Yeah.
We could have done it 50 years ago. So, but if you look at the changes in the technology over the time since we did Apollo and now are unbelievable. One of the most striking ones, if you look at the latest configuration of the Artemis. Artemis is the next program to go back to the moon. If you look at the command module, it's a little bit bigger than the one we had on Apollo, but holds 4 people because all of that stuff is micro-miniaturized. Those black boxes we had in Apollo are probably all in a microchip nowadays.
Yes.
So there's a lot of room inside. So things have changed.
Oh, they've changed a great deal.
Yeah, and the way we're going to do it's going to be different. But Apollo was a challenge. Technically, it was basically an engineering program. You know, people say engineers and scientists. There were not that many scientists work on Apollo.
Really?
Yeah, the major scientists that were there were the geologists that trained the astronauts on what to look for on the moon. Those were the big scientists. The last 4 Apollo flights we turned into science projects. Yeah, but up till then they were mostly engineering projects. It was basically an engineering program. It was done to really beat the Russians.
Right.
And we just barely made it. The Russians already had something going on. So
yeah, I wonder if Kennedy were alive now and looked back on that, if he would have thought, wow, I made this happen. I brought this about. Well, this is amazing.
well, you know, oddly enough, after we had the accident on the pad in 1967, 3 astronauts were killed. You know, what happens is what always happens, they have to have a big investigation, the Congress got to get involved, and everyone was worried about canceling the program, and there was a possibility it might happen. And we managed to salvage it, and I think a lot of that was because everybody wanted to see Kennedy's desire to do it by the end of the decade accomplished. And I think the Congress went along with it, and we ended up doing it. It was a close run thing. we had to first of all prove we had a spacecraft that could go out 250,000 miles and come back,
Yes.
much less land. Okay, and we did that with the first Apollo flight, which Apollo 7, which I'm proud to say I project engineered. But anyway, there was a NASA executive by the name of George Low. He had talked privately in secret in July of 1968. That's it, and they had probably gotten a lot of information from the CIA that the Russians were planning something to go around the moon. So he made the decision that if Apollo 7 was successful,
Mm-hmm.
we would send the Apollo 8 around the moon. And it was. And they never announced it till a month before it was going to fly. And it worked fine. And that essentially won the race.
Yes.
Right there. It was Apollo 8's launch around the moon. And then from then on, we had to just prove how we could land. And that was a touchy game, too. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, there were some scary times. Fortunately, I didn't have to put up the scary times. My thing is not sitting in front of a console watching what's going on instruments. I like to build things.
Yes.
So those people, that's touchy time.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
The average age in mission control was 26 years old.
That's amazing. They were so young, you know.
Gene Kranz was probably the oldest one there.
Wow. My sister worked at NASA during that time, and she made us watch every single one of those launches. You know,
Oh, yeah.
anything that was on TV, she was like, sit down and do this. And then she drug us out to NASA, and she took us on tours. It was fascinating. We loved
Yeah.
it.
It's an interesting place. It really is. I haven't been back in quite a while. So, but no, Apollo Program Office was one of the first groups that moved into the Clear Lake facility when it first opened in the administrative building, the one right in the front. And so no, ended up on the 6th floor, which is where we worked. And so, yeah, it was fun. Quite a time.
I
But when we
imagine.
first moved to Houston, that didn't exist. We had a lot of office buildings around.
Yeah.
There was an Apollo Program Office was in a place called Office City, right across from the Gulf Gate Shopping Center.
Yes,
You
I know
remember
where that
Gulf
is.
Gate?
Yeah, because I grew up there.
Yeah, you grew up there. And then we had people way out on Telephone Road at some place with an apartment building that was being built off the Gulf Freeway.
Yeah, that's exactly where I lived, on Telephone Road, right off of the Gulf Freeway.
Well, there was a big manufacturing facility that was empty way down the end. Our engineering staff took that over.
Oh, okay.
And out the end of Telephone Road. Then there was an apartment building along Gulf Freeway somewhere. And then the Gemini office had a Veterans Administration building in downtown Houston. Mercury Program Office had a, what was it? It was a oil complex.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
off Gulf. We were just spread out all over the place.
Yeah.
But no, it was
And
hectic
Ellington Air
times.
Force Base was what NASA became, but it was small, and then it spread out all over everywhere as well.
Yeah, we took over Ellington Air Force Base too, which was not quite deactivated, but it wasn't really a very active base because we had a lot of these were test pilots, and NASA had a policy of proficiency. Okay, so we had a bunch of T-5 aircraft that they used to fly back and forth to the Cape or to Downey or anywhere else they had to go. You know, the NASA Air Force was bigger than most countries.
Yes, yes.
We had a lot of them. They used Ellington Air Force Base.
Right.
No, we reactivated it. It was interesting that when they had a lot of barracks and all that. It was a World War I base.
Yes, it
For a
was.
long time. When they started to tear open the buildings, they had copper wire about that big around. You know, the contractors stole it all and sold it and
sure.
rewired the whole place.
I'm sure.
But it had oak beams in it. It was really something.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you've had this fascinating, exciting life. How'd you end up in Las Vegas?
Oh, well. That was a long time later. I married my wife in 1964. She lived in San Diego, and she was with me all that time. my first trip out to here was when I was in San Diego in 1958. I just always liked it. And when we moved around a lot, we came out here once in a while because I was stationed in California. After a while, flying back and forth from Houston to go watch my spacecraft became kind of tough at $29 a day in per diem.
Yeah, I would think
You know,
so.
it was kind of tough. So I decided to heck with it. They just reassigned me to the office in California, and I could do it from there. And we would come out here every once in a while. And we liked to travel. So when I retired in 1997, we decided it would be Las Vegas. This is a good place to travel from. You know,
Yes,
you go
yes.
north up into Canada, you go down to Mexico. You know,
It's a good hub, isn't it?
yeah, it is a good hub. And Utah's probably the prettiest state in the whole country.
Oh, I
We
don't
would
think
go
most
through-
people even know how
No,
beautiful Utah
The
is.
southern part of Utah is absolutely gorgeous. So now we enjoyed traveling back and forth. And if you look at the map, you can go Las Vegas, Highway 93 and 95 cross in Las Vegas, and they cross again just before Lake Louise in Canada. So you can go up one side and down the other side. And we've done it several times. No, it was just kind of nice. And when we came here, Lonnie decided she wasn't going to live unless she could have a view of the Strip. So I had to find her a place with a view of the Strip.
Yeah, you have a lovely home. And your wife passed away from cancer, I know.
Right.
And now you have a new wife, a trophy wife, huh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Leslie's a marvel.
She's wonderful, isn't
Oh,
she?
yeah.
I really like her
Oh,
so
yeah.
much. Yeah.
She's something.
Yeah. So you've just had this wonderful life.
Well, it's been fun. After Apollo, I worked on Skylab. I was a project engineer on Skylab for those missions. And then the space shuttle, worked on that one. Though I didn't do project engineer for the space shuttle on. At that time, NASA decided that they needed to have more technical people in the business side of the house. So they sent me off and I got my MBA at Columbia and came back and ran the planning and scheduling group for the space shuttle and several other projects. And then left for a while, went to work for the private companies. But NASA always drew me back. So I ended up going back and, into the space station program at that time. And my last job was, they kind of consolidated the space station and changed things around. And I was the resident representative at McDonnell Douglas for what they were building for the space station. Huntington Beach, nice duty.
Yes.
You know, could drive up and down the Coast Highway in the
I
morning.
wouldn't mind being there.
No, it was nice. It got better. As soon as they consolidated everything, you know, I would have had to go back to Houston. My wife was never crazy about Houston, okay? She spent a lot of time
Well,
there.
I have to agree with her. I grew up there, and I
Yeah,
never
she-
liked the humidity, the mosquitoes, or the cockroaches.
Yeah, well, the cockroach is what she meant. Every once in a while you'd hear her scream and she'd go running through the house
They were
with
this big.
Oh, yeah, with a shoe beating on them to try to kill them. Yeah, so
I can understand her.
so I ended up, a friend of mine just happened to be in town, and he suggested I talk about maybe getting a assignment to the California Space Institute at UCSD in San Diego. Well, that sounded interesting. He knew somebody there, so he called them. They called me. I came by. Well, CalSpace, California Space Institute, was run by Sally Ride,
Yes.
the first American woman
Woman.
in space.
Right.
And she was also a physics professor there. So Sally called me in to see whether we could be compatible. I met her at JPL, and we sat down, got along great. And so Sally told NASA she wanted me to be her NASA rep at UCSD. Living in La Jolla is not too shabby.
Oh, no, it isn't. But, you know, somebody has to do it,
Yeah,
so
it's
it might
just
as well
tough
be you,
to,
huh?
You know, and
Yeah.
then we found a good deal. A friend of mine, you know, he and his wife were moving to Denver, had a beautiful cantilevered house over Mount Soledad looking
Oh.
at the ocean. and he wanted somebody to take care of it, so we had this beautiful home. So I spent 18 months working for Sally, and then they wanted me to come back to Houston, and well, I wasn't too crazy about that. It was time to retire, so I just said heck with it. But it was a good way to end a long career, working with young people.
Oh, I'm
It's
sure.
really, really great. They did a lot of interesting things. One thing I learned was, if there's something difficult to do, I mean, I've been around long enough to know it can't be done. They don't.
No.
So you turn it over to them, and they'll probably get it done.
Yes.
That was a great way to end a career. And
Yep.
then we came here to Las Vegas and lived here since 1997.
Wow, that's a long time.
And Leslie, my current wife, has lived here for 40 years.
Wow.
She was here when it was dust.
I probably came here about that same time, yeah,
Yeah,
because there was a lot of dust.
Yeah, wasn't much in 1958. It stayed at the El Rancho Vegas. It's been gone many, many years.
I worked at the El
Did
Rancho
you?
Vegas. Can you believe that? Everybody goes, "What? You
Yeah.
worked at the El Rancho Vegas?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I was the assistant to the hotel manager.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was a great job.
It's a nice hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the first place I stayed at when I was here. My first wife, we were married here in Las Vegas.
Were you really?
Remember the little church of the wee Kirk of the
Yes, the wee Kirk
Kirk of the Heather.
Kirk of the Heather.
They
Yeah.
just tore it down.
Oh, did they really?
Yeah, the guy bought it without telling anybody, just whipped it down right away. Or they'd have probably made it declared it a
Historical monument or something.
And then Les and I got married at a place up the street, in Las Vegas.
Little Church of the West?
What was it? I don't remember. It's one of the Vegas church places.
Did Elvis marry you?
No, Jim Morrison married us.
Oh, really?
Oh, you want to see a video? Les was concerned because her best friend, she wanted to walk her down the aisle, but she had Parkinson's. She wasn't sure she could do it. Didn't want to offend her, and she was in this quandary about what to do. So I slipped the Jim Morrison look-alike $100, and he walked her down the aisle, and she's laughing all the way down the aisle.
How cool.
It was the coolest wedding. There's an 18-minute video of it. I'll show it to you sometime. It was really cool. It was really interesting.
I don't think people realize how exciting some of the weddings are here.
Oh yeah, they'll do anything you want.
Yeah.
She didn't want Elvis, wanted Jim Morrison. For the Doors was her favorite, so Jim Morrison.
Wow.
And they did it. They looked a lot like Jim Morrison.
My next door neighbor is an Elvis imitator minister. He marries people,
Right.
but he's also an Elvis imitator, and he looks like him and he sounds like him. He sings. Oh, he is amazing. We have so many talented people here.
Oh yeah, so was the Jim Morrison. He's the one that married us. He was a minister, look-alike minister, and they'll do any kind of wedding you want. I mean, if you want a wedding where you're married by a zombie group, they'll satisfy that. I mean,
Well,
and the way we did it was because Les wanted it was a 60s theme. So we must have 20, 30 people there,
Wow.
all dressed in 1960s beatnik type
Oh,
stuff.
that's amazing.
It was a
That's
beautiful
amazing.
wedding. Everybody loved it.
We're running out of time, but we'll have to have you back and talk about Las Vegas weddings, because for a little while there, I was a Las Vegas wedding minister.
Ah,
And we had some interesting groups that came through and got married. And you talk about people in costume. Some of those groups, I've never seen such costumes in my life.
my niece was married at an Elvis wedding.
Well,
Yeah.
amazing,
No,
amazing.
it's strange place, but it's kind of a fun place.
It's a wonderful place.
Well, I always liked it. If you want a place where you can get a sandwich at 4 a.m, this is it.
Yeah.
It's going all the time.
Yeah.
It's a nice place.
Well, and you live right in the middle of all the excitement.
Well, yeah. Sometimes even do another interview, do it at my place. You can look at all my memorabilia and all my
that'd be fun.
space stuff.
We should do that.
Yeah, we'll set it up there.
Yeah,
Oh.
we should do that. That'll be great. Thank you for being here with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been really fun. And thank you for being with us today. I'm sure you enjoyed Fred Peters as much as I did, and learning so much about NASA that we've all kind of been fascinated with, but didn't have the opportunity to get to know somebody who really knows. Thank you.